Good morning, true believers. This is your host, John Krupa. Welcome to another episode of the Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries. And we got a case today out of Atlantic City, New Jersey. It is way back from the early 1980s. It involves a 7-year-old boy and his police officer father. They were both named Gary Grant. One was Junior, one was Senior. Junior was brutally killed, and they still, almost 40 years later, do not know who killed Gary Grant Jr. That's today's case, guys. Please join me on a path down a desperate father's search for the person that killed his little boy way back in the early 80s. Guys, welcome. This is the Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries. We're going to get going on it. I'm going to draw them and tell you about the story at the same time, guys. Prepare yourself and join me for the Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries. Alright, guys, we're going to start drawing Gary Grant Jr. I'm going to tell you about his story at the same time. The horrific unsolved murder of 7-year-old Gary Grant Jr. On Thursday, January 12th, 1984, 7-year-old Gary Grant Jr. was at home from school due to a teacher's conference. At the time, Gary Jr. had been living with his mother, May, because of the divorce with her husband, a New Jersey police officer, a year prior. During the early morning hours on Thursday, Gary Jr. told his mother he had an appointment at 2:30 p.m. She asked what he meant, but he replied by saying it was a secret. May chalked this conversation up merely as an innocent act of being a child who had a play date with other friends living near his residence. Now that's very important, that Gary chose to use the word appointment. There was some kind of meeting that was taking place, unbeknownst to the mother, I believe. And I think his friends had something to do with this too. I will explain later. Gary Jr. left his home close to noon, and his mother told him to be safe and return at 4 p.m. May knew that the children would be children, so she allowed him leeway. When Gary Jr. failed to return at the ordered time, however, when an hour passed by without his emergence, she began worrying, knowing being this late was uncharacteristic of Gary. She decided to search for him by going to the residence of his two friends. They both said they were playing with him, but Gary Jr. left at approximately 4:30 p.m. to head home. Now, they did question one of those two friends, but I'm interested in what the second friend had to say, and there's no record of them that I know of. And I'm just going off the media stuff I've watched and newspaper articles I've skimmed through, but I'm sure there is a written statement by the second friend, but I'm interested to know who that second friend was. Was he older? We know who the first friend was, and they're going to tell you that in a couple of minutes here. They both said they were playing with him, but Gary Jr. left at approximately 4:30 p.m. to head home. At the time, this was a slight relief to May, hoping Gary Jr. would be at home waiting for her and when she returned. Sadly, this was not the case. Once more, she began searching for her son, but after 2 hours with unfortunate progress, she called her estranged husband, Gary Grant Sr. He immediately took time off of his night shift in order to search the surrounding areas with other members of law enforcement. That lasted way until 2 a.m. Nobody was able to track Gary Jr.'s whereabouts. Who were his friends, and what kind of meeting did they set up? There was some kind of meeting that they all set up with somebody. It was significant enough for him to tell his mom about it. So I really do believe there was a meeting. In a child's eyes, it was a meeting, but I believe it was with an adult that may have other motives in his head. Hours later, nearly the entire law enforcement department was searching for young Gary Jr. His father wasn't allowed to participate in the investigation because of regulations. Nevertheless, those directives weren't enough to deter him from independently going door to door asking neighbors if they had witnessed anything. One of those witnesses was Robert Huey, who owned a warehouse near the neighborhood where the disappearance occurred. He stated he had seen Gary Jr. walking near the vicinity a short time after 4:30 p.m., but considering nothing was amiss, he never thought anything of that matter. You gotta be scratching your head on what this meeting that Gary Grant Jr. is talking about. What kind of meeting was it? What did it involve? And how many people did it involve? The following Saturday afternoon, Robert Huey, now aware of Gary Jr.'s disappearance, went to his warehouse to search the premises. That is when he stumbled upon Gary Jr.'s lifeless body in an abandoned lot of land near his storehouse, a mere 2 blocks away from Gary Jr.'s home. In a ghastly scene, the child had been bludgeoned to death by a metal pipe just feet away from his body. Detectives immediately began interviewing those living in the neighborhood with hopes of obtaining credible witnesses and answers to solve the horrendous murder. One observer in particular mentioned seeing Gary Jr. with a 12-year-old named Carl Mason, often referred to as Boo, who suffered from developmental deficiencies. This guy named Boo, we're just going to call him Boo. He's very important to the case, I believe. He may not have done the murder, but I believe he saw what was going on. They say this Boo character was afraid of everything, and he was very cowardly, and he was also handicapped. I believe, and when I was going to school, this may sound a little stereotypical and mean, but when I went to school in the 80s, the handicapped kids would hang out with the other handicapped kids. The troubled kids would hang out with the other troubled kids. So this Boo guy might have been a combination of handicapped and troubled youth, and my instincts say that he was hanging around with other handicapped, troubled youths, and they may have been older, and they may have done this. That may be the culprit right there. Another handicapped, wrong side of the tracks kind of kid that was hanging out with this Boo character. And Boo is afraid to say anything because he's a coward. Well, he's cowardly. Maybe he's not a complete coward, but he's cowardly. Investigators went to Boo's home to verify the witness's statement. According to his words, he and Gary Jr. had spent time together on Wednesday rather than the day of off school on Thursday. Moreover, he said the two of them rode their bicycles to Texas Avenue Park, a location close to both their homes. Nonetheless, with the testimony of an adult witness claiming to see both children together, they took Carl to the police station, accompanied by his grandmother at midnight. Carl is Boo. From there, he was interrogated without his grandmother or even a lawyer present in the room. So they were seen last together, Gary and Boo. And who did this Boo... What was this meeting about? Was Boo involved with this meeting? Did he set this up with one of his older friends that may have been a troubled youth and a little bit slow, wrong side of the tracks, older person? They may have known Boo. They may have had a grudge against Gary's father, who is a police officer. Maybe this Boo knew an older person. Like, I want to guess early 20s maybe. Maybe he knew this person, and this person knew Boo, and this person also had a grudge against Gary Grant Sr. for arresting him or arresting one of his friends. I believe that's the motive of this case. Boo spent 3 hours being questioned by authorities. During the session, Boo had continually given inconsistent answers and had a faulty memory. Now, he was slow. Despite this, the police believed he knew too much information about the timeline of events that only the killer would know. So I believe Boo was present during the murder, and he's too scared to say anything. Subsequently, Boo allegedly admitted being with Gary Jr. on the day of his disappearance, even going as far to confess murdering him. even going as far to confess murdering him, though he retracted his confession numerous times. Eventually, investigators typed up an admission of guilt for Boo, asking for his signature, along with his grandmother's. Unknowingly, Boo, he believed signing the form would allow him to go home, so he and his grandmother signed the paper without knowing the dire consequences. So they did coerce him into signing a false confession. And I don't think Boo was the murderer. He wasn't a murderer at all. But I believe he witnessed the crime. Key to this case is to Boo. Carl. I believe he's the key to this case. After Carl had given his signature, Carl is Boo, he was officially apprehended, charged with murder, and sent to a juvenile detention center. The following day, on January 15th, 1984, he was given a polygraph test that proved inconclusive. 3 days later, on January 18th, he was tested once more. That featured the same result. Carl was innocent in any involvement with Gary Jr.'s tragic murder. 1 month later, a judge cleared Boo of all criminal charges because his confession was not admissible in the court of law. And they threw out the confession, but I heard they still were trying to go after this kid just because he was the last kid to be seen with Gary Grant Jr. the day he was murdered. Gary Grant Jr.'s murder case ultimately went cold for the better part of 2 years until a sudden handwritten message was found scribbled on a police vehicle. It read, "Gary Grant is dead. I am living. Another will die on 1/12/86 if all goes right." It was undetermined who had written the mysterious message, but thankfully nobody was discovered murdered on that particular date. Now, he did say, if all goes well. Maybe nothing went right that day and it had to be thwarted, And that handwritten note on the police card, sketched on the police card, that was written by somebody's finger, I believe. That's what it looked like anyway. Who did it? Was it someone that knew Boo and knew Gary Grant Sr.? Was it someone that Gary Grant Sr. gave a hard time and messed up his life a little bit, and just doing his job, though? Gary Grant Sr. was a police officer. He was doing his job. You have to ruffle little feathers up. It's part of the territory. Somebody had something against this little boy's father. A few weeks later from the initial message, a second note was found carved into a sidewalk with this message stating, "Gary Grant Jr. lives. I still killed him. Son of a pig officer, payback is a MF." Now this is the opposite of what the last message said. Gary Grant is dead. I killed him. This says Gary Grant Jr. lives. This person is messing with the police, obviously. This is what you call a mind fuck. This person may have been slow and maladjusted, you know, and misunderstood. And those type of people tend to gravitate towards other slow people and maladjusted people. And I don't think it would be out of the ordinary for an older adolescent in his 20s to befriend a younger kid and a 11, 12-year-old boy and kind of become just casual friends. And because like I said, and when I went to school in the 80s, the similar kids hung out with the similar kids. People with disabilities hung out with other people with disabilities. People that were from the wrong side of the tracks hung out with other people from the wrong side of the tracks. The police automatically considered the logical assumption that the murderer was an act of revenge from an individual or family member of that person who had previously been arrested prior to the tragedy. Gary Grant Sr. and other members of law enforcement decided to look back through the database of prior convicts that were arrested, but nobody was incarcerated that would warrant this type of unsavory behavior. The general consensus amongst investigators was that the messages were simply a cold-hearted prank to further dampen difficult unsolved case. I don't believe it was a prank. I think it was the killer. This is a guy that's trying to emulate the Zodiac or somebody like that. Similar. Yes, I don't think it was a prank at all. Who killed this little boy? And why? After 2 messages relating to Gary Jr.'s untimely death, they suddenly stopped. Since then, suspects had come and gone, but once more all tips and leads ran dry until an unexpected surprise in 2016. So that's from the mid-80s, you fast forward to 2016. In 2016, Gary Grant Jr. had long since Gary Grant Sr. had long since retired from Atlantic City's police department, but finding his son's killer was prominent as ever, telling the press of Atlantic City, "My 7-year-old son has remained on my mind every waking moment of my life." And that's true. If your kid gets murdered, it's never going to end until you bring that person down to justice. With retirement allowing his idle hands to be free, Gary Grant Sr. decided to browse old evidence collected during the beginning years of the investigation. He was looking for audio tapes gathered in order to convert them into MP3 files. During this process, he discovered an audio tape that he had never listened to before. This audio recording, made to 911 on March 8, 1986, coincidentally the date of Gary Jr.'s birthday, somehow got lost in the shuffle. Here is a transcript of the call. Dispatcher, police and fire. Caller, is it possible for me to collect a reward on my own self for the murder of Gary Grant? Is it for you to collect a reward for yourself? Uh-huh. If you have information, what are you saying that? I don't know what you mean. Like, you know who did it? Something like that, you mean? No. How's if I did it myself and I want to collect the whole reward? If you did it? Yeah. Dispatcher, suppose I hook you into the detective bureau. No, that's okay. Dispatcher says something unclear. Caller says something unclear. It's not a crank call. You're never going to catch me. You know what? Dispatcher said. You're never going to catch me. Dispatcher said, you know what? Take your time. I didn't hear you. And that's the end of it. That phone call was supposedly to Gary Grant Sr. Upon hearing the clip, he uploaded the soundbite to Facebook with hopes of generating listeners who may recognize the voice. Furthermore, another conversation happened 3 months later on June 2nd, 1986. The caller purportedly kept his identity a secret, but shockingly mentioned a possible suspect that curiously confessed to the brutally murdering Gary Grant Jr. by saying because of his father. The cops know what he looks like. That's a quote from the caller. Unfortunately, the unknown caller never elaborated on the meaning behind this statement regarding Gary Grant Jr.'s father. Although the police and Gary Sr. have the name of the individual mentioned during the phone call, they are unable to publicly release his name because he has not been charged with any involvement with Gary Jr.'s murder. On the other side of the spectrum, Gary Sr. noted he knows the unidentified suspect, who has no recollection of having any problem with him in the slightest. In a fascinating turn of events, the suspect being pursued was arrested years prior in 2013 for molesting a 5-year-old child. As of now, it is unclear whether or not the aforementioned suspect is guilty of the murder of Gary Grant Jr. The coverage for this unsolved murder is rather slim. There are no prominent suspects, but Gary Grant Sr. adamantly believes Carl Bull Mason is involved with his son's murder in some formality. He also holds firm that Carl never acted alone, but regrettably those are only theories of a case still unsolved for almost 4 decades. If you have any information concerning this case, you make your phone call to either one of these numbers. 609-909-7666 or 609-272-7257. 609-909-7666 or 609-272-7257. That's about all the time we have today, folks. Still, there's no answer. This is almost 40 years. Who killed Gary Grant Jr. and why? True believers, peace out. Do something nice for somebody today. Doesn't cost you anything, and it makes everybody feel better. Peace out.